Before we dive into the story, take a moment and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Let's begin. The subway car was crowded, loud in the way only a weekday morning could be. People stared at their phones, clutched coffee cups, shifted their weight as the train rattled forward. No one noticed the small girl sitting near the door. No one, except the dog at her feet. Lila Morrison couldn't have been more than 8. Her legs barely reached the floor, her shoes worn at the tips. Beside her sat a golden-brown dog, perfectly still, eyes alert but calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that didn't belong in a noisy subway car. Then Lila moved. She didn't speak. She didn't look around. She simply pressed 2 fingers gently into the dog's foreleg. It wasn't affection. It was a signal. The dog's ears lifted. His body shifted slightly, positioning himself closer to Lila, closer to the woman standing beside her, Lila's mother, Evelyn. At that exact moment, a man across the aisle swayed as the train jolted, nearly losing his balance. The dog leaned just enough to block him from falling into them. No one said thank you. No one realized anything had almost gone wrong. Except Lila. Evelyn exhaled sharply, brushing it off as coincidence. She told herself the same thing she told herself every day. That everything was fine, that she was managing, that her daughter was just unusually observant. Kids noticed things adults missed. That was all. Across from them, Margaret Hale stared at the floor. Lila's grandmother held her purse tightly, as if it contained something fragile. Her gaze drifted, unfocused, then returned, startled, as though she'd forgotten where she was for a second. "You okay, Mom?" Evelyn asked. Margaret smiled quickly. Of course, just tired. They were all tired. Evelyn from juggling work shifts that never quite paid enough. Margaret from years of holding things together without complaint. And Lila. Lila watched them both, quiet and steady, her hand still resting on the dog's fur. The train screeched into the next station. Doors opened. A rush of people flooded in, breaking the moment. The dog relaxed, but his eyes never closed. Evelyn finally looked down at him. "Good boy," she murmured, more to herself than to the dog. Lila didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply leaned back against the seat, as if checking off something on a list no one else could see. As the train pulled away again, Evelyn felt an odd chill. She couldn't explain it, but a thought pressed into her mind, unwelcome and persistent. How long had her daughter been doing things like this? She glanced at Lila, ready to ask a question, but stopped. Lila was watching the other passengers now, scanning faces, exits, small movements. Not like a child watching out of boredom, like someone on duty. The dog shifted again, closer to her knees, waiting. Evelyn swallowed. Whatever had just happened in that subway car wasn't dramatic enough for anyone else to notice. There were no raised voices, no accidents, no reason to worry. And yet deep down, Evelyn knew something had changed. Because her daughter had just handled a situation Evelyn never even realized existed. And once you notice something like that, you can't unsee it. The train sped into the tunnel, carrying them forward, toward answers none of them were ready to face yet. The moment they stepped off the train, Evelyn told herself to forget what had happened. People avoided trouble every day without realizing it. Children were perceptive. Dogs were protective. There was no hidden meaning, no reason to let her thoughts spiral. Life was already heavy enough without inventing new worries. Still, as they walked up the station stairs, Evelyn noticed how Lila stayed half a step ahead of Margaret, adjusting her pace without being asked. When Margaret hesitated, Lila slowed. When the crowd pressed in, the dog shifted smoothly, creating space before anyone collided with them. Too smooth. "You don't have to rush," Evelyn said, forcing a light tone. "We've got time." Lila nodded, but didn't answer. Her hand rested on the dog's collar, fingers curled with quiet confidence. At home, the apartment greeted them with familiar clutter, stacked mail, shoes by the door, the low hum of the refrigerator working overtime. Margaret settled into her chair, sighing with relief. "I'll make tea," Lila said, already moving toward the kitchen. Evelyn stopped short. "Sweetheart, you don't need to." "It's okay," Lila replied. I know how Grandma likes it. And she did. The water temperature, the steeping time, the spoon placed just so. Margaret smiled, grateful, unaware of the weight behind the gesture. Evelyn watched from the doorway, a tight feeling growing in her chest. This wasn't new. That was the problem. None of it was new. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. Evelyn almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. "Mrs. Morrison?" the voice on the other end asked gently. "This is Dr. Alan Brooks. We spoke briefly last week about your mother." Evelyn closed her eyes. Of course, she had hoped the call would somehow disappear if she ignored it long enough. "Yes," she said. "I remember." "I won't take much of your time," Dr. Brooks continued. "I just wanted to check in. You mentioned things had been challenging lately." Evelyn glanced toward the living room. Lila sat on the floor, reading quietly. The dog lay beside her, alert, even at rest. "We're managing," Evelyn said quickly. "We always do." There was a pause. Not judgmental, just patient. "Managing works," Dr. Brooks said, "until it doesn't." Evelyn swallowed. "My daughter helps. She likes to feel useful." Another pause, slightly longer this time. "She's very young," he said carefully. "I know," Evelyn replied, sharper than she intended. "And she's fine." When the call ended, Evelyn felt both relieved and unsettled. She had defended her family, her choices. She always did. But later that evening, as she sorted laundry, she noticed something strange. The dog responded instantly when Lila tapped the floor twice, before any sound escaped her lips. Not a trick, not play. A response. Evelyn frowned. "Who taught you that?" she asked. Lila looked up, surprised. "Taught me what?" Evelyn gestured vaguely. "With him." Lila hesitated, just for a second. "He already knew," she said softly. That night, as Evelyn lay awake listening to the city outside, the thought returned, heavier than before. If no one taught her, how did she learn? And why did it feel like she had been answering a call no one else was willing to hear? The next morning unfolded like so many others, which was exactly why Evelyn didn't notice the pattern right away. Lila woke before her alarm, dressed quietly, and checked on her grandmother without being asked. Margaret was awake but staring at the window, her thoughts somewhere far away. Lila didn't comment. She simply opened the curtains halfway, letting in enough light to be comforting, not blinding. Breakfast followed a rhythm Lila seemed to carry in her head. The right bowl for Margaret, the right spoon. The dog positioned himself near the hallway, not blocking it, just watching. "Good morning, sunshine," Evelyn said, forcing brightness into her voice. Lila smiled. "Morning." At school, teachers praised Lila constantly. She was polite, observant, always willing to help. "She reminds me if someone forgets their lunch," one teacher said, "and she's very calm when other kids get upset." Evelyn nodded, proud and uneasy at the same time. During recess, Lila sat on a bench reading, while the dog, waiting outside the fence with a handler's permission, kept his eyes trained on her. When another child tripped nearby and started crying, Lila closed her book instantly, already standing, already scanning for an adult. "She's very responsible," the teacher added. "Sometimes I forget she's only 8. That sentence followed Evelyn all the way home. In the afternoon, a neighbor stopped by to drop off a package. Margaret answered the door and seemed confused by the box in her hands. Lila stepped in smoothly, thanked the neighbor, signed the clipboard, and set the package down. "You're such a big help," the neighbor said warmly. Lila nodded, accepting the praise like a duty fulfilled. That evening, Evelyn finally sat down with a cup of coffee, watching her daughter do homework at the kitchen table. Lila finished early, checked the clock, and stood. "I'll remind Grandma about her pills," she said. Evelyn looked up sharply. "I was going to do that." Lila froze. "Oh, okay." The dog lifted his head. Evelyn's heart tightened. "How long have you been reminding her?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle. Lila thought for a moment. "Since she started forgetting." "When was that?" Lila shrugged. "A while." The answer was too vague, too practiced. Later, as Evelyn tucked Lila into bed, she noticed a small notebook on the nightstand. It wasn't colorful or playful, just plain. "What's this?" Evelyn asked. Lila hesitated. "Just notes." Evelyn flipped one page before Lila could stop her. Times, short reminders, small observations written in careful handwriting. Nothing alarming, nothing dramatic, but nothing a child should be tracking either. Lila reached out, her voice soft but firm. "I need that." Evelyn handed the notebook back slowly, a chill creeping up her spine. For the first time, she realized the truth wasn't hiding in a single moment. It was woven into every ordinary day. And she had been calling it normal. Evelyn spent the rest of the week paying attention, not the rushed kind of attention that comes from guilt, but the quiet kind that notices pauses, patterns, and what people stop talking about. Once she started looking, she couldn't stop seeing it. Margaret forgot small things first, where she placed her glasses, whether she had already had breakfast. She laughed it off every time, turning it into a joke before anyone else could worry. Lila never laughed. Instead, she adjusted. She repeated information without sounding like she was repeating it. She left notes where Margaret would find them. She guided conversations gently back on track when they drifted too far. And the dog, Rowan, mirrored her movements with unsettling precision. One afternoon, Evelyn watched from the hallway as Margaret stood at the sink, staring at the running water, unsure what to do next. Before Evelyn could step in, Lila appeared beside her grandmother, placed a cup in her hand, and turned off the tap. "There we go," Lila said softly. Margaret smiled, relieved. "Thank you, sweetheart." Evelyn felt something twist inside her. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a stack of old papers she had pulled from a drawer she rarely opened. Bills, letters, forms, things she had meant to sort through months ago. And there it was, a certificate folded neatly between documents. Professional, official, training records. Her breath caught. Rowan's name was there, dates, hours, specialized notes written in careful handwriting. The training had begun years ago, before Lila was old enough to hold a leash. Evelyn stared at the page, her thoughts racing. She tried to remember when Rowan had joined their family. The memory refused to settle into place, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. "How long have we had him?" she asked aloud. Margaret looked up from the couch. "Oh, he's always been around, hasn't he?" That wasn't an answer. Lila stood very still near the doorway, the dog pressed close to her leg. "Lila," Evelyn said gently, "do you remember when Rowan came to live with us?" Lila's fingers tightened slightly in the dog's fur. "He was here when I needed him." Evelyn's chest tightened. "What does that mean?" Lila didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quiet. "It means he knows what to do." That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The apartment felt different, heavier, as if the walls were holding secrets she had ignored for too long. She thought about all the times she had praised Lila for being helpful, all the moments she had accepted support without asking where it came from. This wasn't about one afternoon, or one subway ride. This was bigger. The realization settled in slowly, like a shadow stretching across familiar ground. Her daughter hadn't stepped into responsibility once. She had been living inside it for a long time, and somehow Evelyn had missed when it began. As she lay awake, listening to the steady breathing of her family down the hall, one thought refused to leave her mind. If Rowan wasn't trained for Lila, then who had he been trained for, and what had everyone been so afraid to name? The day everything almost went wrong began like any other. Evelyn had an early shift, the kind that left no room for delays. Margaret insisted she was fine staying home with Lila for a few hours. She said it with confidence, even smiled, and Evelyn chose to believe her. Belief was easier than arguing, easier than admitting fear. "I'll be back by noon," Evelyn said, grabbing her bag. "Call me if you need anything." "We will," Margaret replied. Lila stood quietly by the door with Rowan, her backpack already packed. She nodded, as if she understood the plan better than anyone else. The morning passed peacefully at first. Lila worked on a puzzle at the table, while Margaret read the same page of a magazine again and again, unaware she was doing it. Rowan lay between them, eyes moving gently from one to the other. Then Margaret stood up. "I think I'll make lunch," she said. Lila looked up. Something in her expression shifted. Not panic, not fear, just focus. "Maybe we can wait a little," Lila suggested. "Mom will be home soon." Margaret frowned, confused. "She already ate." "No, Grandma," Lila said softly. "That was yesterday." Margaret hesitated. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Rowan rose to his feet. Margaret moved toward the stove, hands uncertain. A pot was placed wrong, a burner turned on without anything above it. Lila reacted instantly. She tapped Rowan's shoulder once. He stepped between Margaret and the stove, gently nudging her backward. Not forceful, just enough to stop her. "Oh," Margaret said, startled. Then she laughed. "Silly me." Lila turned off the burner, her hands steady. "It's okay," she said. "Let's sit." They sat together at the table, Margaret calm again, unaware of what had almost happened. When Evelyn returned home and heard the story, her knees went weak. "That shouldn't have been on you," she said, kneeling in front of Lila. "You shouldn't have to do that." Lila shook her head quickly. "It's fine. I know how." "That's the problem," Evelyn whispered. Later that night, Lila stood in the hallway, listening to raised voices behind the closed bedroom door. Evelyn and Margaret weren't shouting, but the tension was sharp enough to feel. "I didn't mean to forget," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I tried so hard." "I know," Evelyn replied, "but trying isn't enough anymore." Lila hugged Rowan's neck, pressing her face into his fur. The dog stayed still, solid and warm. "I'm sorry," Lila murmured into his ear. "I'll do better." Rowan lifted his head, eyes gentle but alert, as if waiting for instructions that should never have been hers to give. And in that moment, something quiet but dangerous settled into Lila's heart. The belief that if she stayed perfect, stayed ready, nothing bad would ever happen. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the turned-off stove, finally understanding the truth she could no longer ignore. This wasn't a small problem. It was a test. And her daughter had been passing it for far too long. The morning after the incident, the apartment felt quieter than usual, not peaceful, careful. Evelyn moved through the rooms with a new awareness, as if the walls themselves were listening. She made breakfast instead of letting Lila do it. She reminded Margaret about her tea, her pills, her sweater. Each small act felt strangely heavy, like lifting something that had been resting on the wrong shoulders for far too long. Lila noticed. She didn't complain. She didn't argue. She simply hovered, hands clasped in front of her, eyes following every movement. When Evelyn reached for a pan, Lila flinched slightly, then caught herself and looked away. "I've got it," Evelyn said gently, meeting her daughter's eyes. "You can go sit." Lila nodded and obeyed, but Rowan followed Evelyn instead, positioning himself near the stove. Evelyn paused, then continued, pretending not to notice the quiet message in the dog's stance. Later that day, Evelyn made calls she had been avoiding. Work schedules were rearranged. A neighbor agreed to check in occasionally. Dr. Brooks returned her call, his voice calm, reassuring, careful not to push too hard. "You're taking the right steps," he said. "Change doesn't have to be sudden to be real." Evelyn hoped he was right. Margaret, for her part, tried harder than anyone. She wrote herself notes. She asked questions instead of pretending she knew the answers. Some days were better than others. On the good days, laughter filled the apartment again, and Evelyn allowed herself to breathe. On the harder days, Lila retreated into silence. One evening, Evelyn found her sitting on the floor of her bedroom, the notebook open in her lap. She wasn't writing. She was reading old pages, her finger tracing lines as if checking whether the world was still where she had left it. "We're changing things," Evelyn said softly, sitting beside her. "You don't have to keep track of everything anymore." Lila nodded. "I know." But she didn't close the notebook. That night, Evelyn sorted through more old boxes, searching for anything she might have missed. In the back of a closet, beneath winter coats, she found a small folder. Inside were more training notes, not just about Rowan's commands, but about routines, Schedules, signals, all written in an adult's handwriting. Evelyn's breath caught. These weren't instructions for a child. They were instructions for someone who needed help staying safe, staying steady. She closed the folder quickly when she heard footsteps. Lila stood in the doorway. "Did you find it?" she asked. Evelyn turned slowly. "Find what?" "The papers," Lila said. Her voice wasn't accusing, just tired. "The ones that explain him." Evelyn's chest tightened. "You knew they were there." Lila shrugged. "I helped put them away." Rowan sat beside her, calm, waiting. Evelyn realized then that reconstruction wasn't just about adding support. It was about carefully dismantling something that had been built in silence. And that kind of rebuilding took time. As she turned off the light that night, Evelyn wondered how many quiet systems like this existed everywhere, held together not by plans or professionals, but by people too young, too tired, or too loving to say no, and whether she had started fixing things soon enough. In the darkness, Rowan shifted once, as if listening for a signal that never came. For the first time in a long while, Lila fell asleep without checking the clock. Evelyn used to believe that problems arrived loudly. An argument, a phone call, a bill stamped in red ink. But now she understood the truth was quieter. It crept in slowly, settling into habits, disguising itself as responsibility and love. And once it made itself at home, it became hard to tell where it ended and where the people began. The real opponent wasn't a person. It was exhaustion. It was the long years Margaret had spent caring for others without ever slowing down. It was Evelyn's constant balancing act between work, worry, and guilt. It was the unspoken agreement that everyone would just keep going a little longer. And somehow, in the middle of all that, Lila had stepped forward. One afternoon, Evelyn left early from work and returned home unexpectedly. She paused outside the apartment door when she heard voices inside. Lila's voice, calm, direct. "No, Grandma, that was yesterday," she was saying. "Today we're staying in." There was a pause. Then Margaret laughed softly. "Right, of course, thank you for reminding me." Evelyn closed her eyes. Inside, Rowan stood between them, relaxed but alert, as if this were a familiar routine. Later, Evelyn sat with Dr. Brooks in his quiet office. She told him everything this time, the notebook, the training records, the small moments that added up to something much larger. He listened without interrupting. "When families are stretched thin for a long time," he said finally, "they adapt, not always in healthy ways, often in invisible ones." Evelyn stared at her hands. "She thinks it's her job." "That's common," he said gently. "When someone sees a gap, they fill it, especially when they care." On the walk home, Evelyn felt the weight of the truth settle in fully. This wasn't about fixing one mistake. It was about undoing years of quiet acceptance. That evening, she gathered everyone in the living room. Margaret sat stiffly, already sensing the seriousness. Lila perched on the edge of the couch, Rowan at her feet. "We need to talk about how things have been," Evelyn began. Margaret's smile faltered. "I'm managing," she said quickly. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," Evelyn replied. "But neither is Lila." Lila's eyes widened slightly. Evelyn continued, voice steady but trembling underneath. "We've all been so busy holding everything together that we didn't notice who was doing the holding." Silence filled the room. Margaret looked at Lila, really looked at her, and something in her expression shifted. Surprise, then sadness, then a quiet understanding. "Oh," she whispered. Lila looked down at her hands. "I just didn't want anyone to worry," she said. That was the moment Evelyn knew how deep it went. Later that night, after Margaret had gone to bed, Evelyn sat with Lila on the couch. "You don't have to be in charge," Evelyn said softly. "Not anymore." Lila nodded, but her voice shook. "If I stop, and what if everything falls apart?" Evelyn pulled her close. "Then I'll be there, and we'll figure it out together." Across the room, Rowan lifted his head, watching them both. The opponent had finally been named, but naming it didn't mean it was defeated, because the hardest part wasn't seeing the problem. It was learning how to live without it. They left the city on a quiet Saturday morning. No rushing, no alarms. Just the steady hum of the car and the unfamiliar comfort of space. Evelyn told herself the short trip wasn't an escape, only a pause. A chance to breathe somewhere the walls didn't feel so close. The small rental house sat near a lake, surrounded by trees that barely moved in the soft wind. Margaret stepped out of the car slowly, taking in the view as if seeing something long forgotten. "I used to love places like this," she said, almost to herself. Lila stayed close, watching her grandmother's footing, though Evelyn had asked her not to. Rowan walked between them, tail low, eyes attentive. Inside, the house was simple, old furniture. Faded photographs of people who didn't belong to them. It felt safe in the way borrowed places often do. No expectations, no history. That afternoon, Margaret sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the water. Lila joined her, handing over a cup of tea without being asked. Evelyn noticed, then hesitated. She let it happen. "Your mother worries too much," Margaret said with a soft smile. Lila shrugged. "She loves you." Margaret's smile faded slightly. "So do I." There was a pause, filled only by the sound of birds. "I was like your mother once," Margaret said quietly. "Always holding things together. I thought if I stayed strong, no one would have to be afraid." Lila listened without interrupting. "But strength gets tired," Margaret continued, "and when it doesn't always warn you." That evening, after Margaret went to bed, Evelyn found Lila sitting on the dock with Rowan beside her. The sky reflected in the lake like a second world beneath their feet. "You don't have to watch everyone all the time," Evelyn said, sitting next to her. Lila nodded. "I know." She skipped a stone across the water. "He was here before I needed him," she added suddenly. Evelyn turned. "Who?" Lila looked at Rowan, who stared calmly at the lake. "Rowan." He already knew what to do. "I just learned when to listen." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. "Learned from who?" Lila hesitated. "From watching." That night, Evelyn lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, thinking about Margaret's words. "Strength gets tired." The phrase echoed like a warning passed down quietly through time. In the early hours of the morning, Evelyn heard movement. She stepped into the hallway and saw Margaret standing there, confused, uncertain. Before Evelyn could speak, Rowan was already there, guiding Margaret gently back to bed. Lila appeared moments later, sleepy but alert, as if summoned by instinct. Evelyn stopped herself. She didn't step in right away. She watched, not to judge, to understand. And what she understood was this. The refuge wasn't just the lake, or the quiet, or the space away from the city. It was the first place where the truth could surface without breaking anyone. As dawn approached, Evelyn made a quiet decision. When they returned home, things would change. Not all at once, not perfectly. But this pause, this refuge, had shown her something she could no longer ignore. Rowan settled at the foot of the bed, vigilant even in rest, and Lila, for once, slept without listening for footsteps. The truth didn't arrive with shouting or anger. It arrived folded inside an old envelope. Back in the city, routine tried to settle in again. But something had shifted. Evelyn felt it in the way Margaret watched her more closely now, and in the way Lila hesitated before stepping in to help, like someone waiting for permission that never came. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork at the kitchen table, Evelyn found the envelope tucked between insurance forms and outdated bills. It was yellowed at the edges, carefully sealed, addressed in Margaret's handwriting. Inside were copies of decisions that had been made years earlier, arrangements, agreements, plans created quietly, without discussion, without debate. They were practical, thoughtful, and never shared. Evelyn's hands trembled as she read. That night she placed the papers on the table between herself and her mother. "You did this without telling me," Evelyn said, her voice low. Margaret stared at the documents, then nodded slowly. "I didn't want to worry you. You decided things that affected my daughter," Evelyn replied, That affected all of us. Margaret's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid I wouldn't be able to keep going. Afraid you already had too much on your shoulders. Evelyn swallowed hard. So you put it on hers? Silence stretched between them. In the hallway, Lila listened. She hadn't meant to. She had been heading to her room when the voices stopped her in place. She pressed her back against the wall, Rowan sitting beside her, steady and quiet. I thought I was protecting her, Margaret said softly. She was so capable, so calm. I told myself it was temporary. Evelyn closed her eyes. Temporary turned into years. That word, years, settled heavily in the room. Later that night, Lila didn't come out for dinner. Evelyn knocked gently on her door. Sweetheart? No answer. Inside, Lila sat on her bed, notebook open, pages turned back to the beginning. Rowan rested his head on her knee. I messed up, Lila whispered, though no one had accused her of anything. Evelyn sat beside her. You didn't. I should have said something sooner, Lila said. I should have told you I was tired. Evelyn felt her heart break in a way that didn't make a sound. You were a child, she said. That was my job to notice. Lila looked up, eyes glossy but determined. I can still help. That's what scares me, Evelyn replied gently. The next morning, Lila stopped reminding Margaret about her schedule. She stopped checking the clock. She stopped watching the door. She withdrew, quietly, as if punishment were required. Margaret noticed first. She's so quiet today, she said. Evelyn nodded. She's resting. But Lila wasn't resting. She was carrying something heavier than before, the belief that the family had come apart because she had tried too hard to hold it together. That evening, as the apartment filled with shadows, Lila did something she hadn't done in a long time. She closed her notebook. Rowan watched her closely, uncertain, and for the first time since anyone could remember, Lila didn't know what she was supposed to do next. That uncertainty settled in her chest, deep and cold, because when trust breaks quietly, it leaves behind a question no one is ready to answer. If I stop holding everything together, who will? The change didn't come from inside the apartment. It came from someone who had no history with their silence. The following week, Evelyn received a call from Lila's school. Her stomach tightened immediately, old worries rising before the words were even spoken. There's no emergency, the counselor said quickly. We just wanted to talk. In the small office filled with children's drawings and neatly stacked books, Evelyn listened as the counselor spoke carefully. Lila is wonderful, she said. Kind, observant, but she's been quieter, more withdrawn. Evelyn nodded. She's been through a lot. The counselor folded her hands. Sometimes children who seem the most capable are the ones who need the most reassurance. Those words landed gently, but firmly. On the walk home, Lila stayed close to Evelyn, their hands brushing occasionally. Rowan followed, attentive but less tense than before, as if sensing a shift in the air. At a crosswalk, Lila stopped suddenly. You forgot your scarf, she said, reaching into Evelyn's bag. Evelyn smiled softly. That's okay. I can be cold. Lila frowned. But you might get sick. Evelyn knelt in front of her daughter. And if I do, I'll take care of it. That's part of being grown up. Lila searched her face as if testing whether the words were real. That evening, Evelyn made a choice she had been circling for weeks. She sat at the kitchen table with Margaret and spoke plainly, without cushioning her words. We need more help, she said. Not someday, now. Margaret looked down, then nodded slowly. I don't want to be afraid anymore, she admitted. Arrangements began. Not perfect ones, not easy ones, but real. A neighbor agreed to check in daily. Dr. Brooks scheduled regular visits. Evelyn adjusted her work hours again, even though it meant less money for a while. When Evelyn told Lila, she expected resistance. Instead, Lila exhaled. Does that mean I don't have to watch all the time? She asked. No, Evelyn said. It means you don't have to watch at all. Lila's shoulders slumped, the tension easing in a way Evelyn hadn't realized was possible. That night, Lila left her bedroom door open for the first time in months. She didn't check the clock before bed. She didn't write anything in the notebook. She drew instead. Simple pictures, a house, a lake, a dog lying down. Rowan curled up nearby, relaxed. Evelyn watched from the doorway, heart full and aching at the same time. She knew this wasn't the end of their struggle. There were still questions unanswered, pieces of the past she didn't fully understand. But something had shifted. The spark wasn't a dramatic moment or a grand decision. It was the quiet realization that responsibility could be shared, and that no child should have to earn rest by being perfect. As the lights dimmed, Evelyn felt a cautious hope take root, small, fragile, but real. And for the first time, she believed it might be enough to grow into something stronger. Change announced itself in small, practical ways. A calendar appeared on the refrigerator, its squares filled with careful handwriting. Not Lila's this time, but Evelyn's. Appointments, check-ins, names of people who had agreed to help. The days no longer blended together as much, and for the first time in a long while, the future looked slightly organized. Margaret struggled with the adjustments. Some mornings she resisted, insisting she was fine, that all this fuss was unnecessary. Other days she seemed relieved, even grateful, though she rarely said it out loud. "I don't like feeling watched," she admitted once, her voice tight. "I know," Evelyn replied, "but this isn't about watching. It's about sharing." Lila listened from the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. She no longer jumped into conversations. She waited, observed, as if unsure where she fit now that the rules had changed. Rowan, however, remained alert. One afternoon, as a neighbor sat with Margaret in the living room, Rowan paced near the hallway, pausing every few steps as if expecting something. Lila noticed. "He's still waiting," she said quietly. Evelyn knelt beside her. "He's adjusting too." That evening, Evelyn gathered everyone at the table. The mood was tense but hopeful, like the moments before a storm that might pass without breaking anything. "I want us to be honest," Evelyn said, "about what we can handle and what we can't." Margaret nodded slowly. "I don't always know what I need," she said, "but I know I don't want to lose either of you." Lila swallowed. "I don't want to mess things up." Evelyn reached across the table, taking her daughter's hands. "You won't, because you're not in charge of keeping everything together anymore." The words sounded right. Necessary. Later that night, Evelyn found Rowan sitting alone in the hallway, staring at the closed bedroom door where Margaret slept. "You don't have to guard her by yourself anymore," Evelyn whispered. Rowan tilted his head as if listening. In the days that followed, support slowly became routine. Conversations replaced assumptions. Questions replaced silence. It wasn't easy. Old habits tried to return, especially when everyone was tired. One evening, Margaret became frustrated, snapping over something small. Lila stiffened, ready to step in. Evelyn caught her eye and shook her head gently. "I've got this," Evelyn said aloud. Lila hesitated, then nodded. That moment mattered more than anyone realized. As the week came to a close, Evelyn reviewed the plans they had made. There was still one big decision looming, one they hadn't spoken about yet. It hovered at the edges of every conversation, waiting. That night, as Lila lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, feeling something unfamiliar. Uncertainty, but mixed with it was something new. Relief. Rowan settled at the foot of her bed, calm but watchful, as if preparing for something ahead. The strength they were gathering wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, and it was leading them toward a truth they could no longer avoid. The decision arrived without ceremony. No dramatic announcement, no raised voices. Just a quiet understanding that something important had to change, and that change would cost them all something they weren't ready to give up. Evelyn stood by the kitchen window one morning, staring out at the street below. People moved with purpose, carrying bags, walking dogs, living lives that looked simple from a distance. She wished briefly that simplicity could be borrowed. Margaret sat at the table, hands folded. She already knew. "You don't have to say it like it's bad news," Margaret said gently. "I've been thinking about it too." Evelyn turned. I don't want you to feel pushed. Margaret smiled, tired but sincere. I don't want Lila to feel responsible for me anymore. The words hung in the air, heavy and necessary. Later that afternoon, Evelyn explained the plan to Lila. She chose her words carefully, leaving out details that didn't belong to a child. Grandma's going to spend some time somewhere she can get more help, Evelyn said. People whose job it is to make sure she's okay. Lila listened quietly, her face unreadable. Will she be far? She asked. No, Evelyn replied quickly. And we'll visit. Often. Lila nodded once. She didn't cry, she didn't argue. She simply asked, Is it my fault? Evelyn felt the question like a sharp ache. No, she said firmly. It's because I waited too long to do what I should have done sooner. That night Margaret packed slowly, carefully choosing what to bring and what to leave behind. Each object seemed to carry a memory. She handed Lila a small framed photo, an old picture of the three of them, smiling without effort. For you, Margaret said. So you don't forget I'm still me. Lila hugged the frame to her chest. I won't. Rowan watched everything closely, his calm presence steady but curious, as if sensing a shift in his role. The morning Margaret left, the apartment felt too large, too quiet. At the door, Margaret knelt in front of Lila. You did more than anyone could ever ask, she said softly. But now it's time for you to just be you. Lila nodded, her throat tight. When the door closed behind Margaret, Evelyn leaned against it, fighting the urge to second-guess everything. The sacrifice was real. Independence, familiarity, pride. But something else filled the space it left behind. That afternoon, Lila wandered the apartment, unsure what to do with herself. She picked up her notebook, then set it down again. She turned on the television, then turned it off. Finally, she sat on the floor and began building a puzzle she had never had time to finish before. Rowan lay beside her, relaxed but attentive. Evelyn watched from the kitchen, heart heavy but certain. They had lost something precious, but they had protected something far more important. And for the first time, the weight Lila had carried for so long was no longer hers alone. The sacrifice had been made, and its meaning had only just begun to unfold. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt unfamiliar but carefully balanced. The apartment was quieter without Margaret's constant presence, yet it no longer carried the same tension. Mornings were slower, evenings were calmer. Evelyn cooked more. Lila laughed more, softly at first, as if testing whether it was allowed. They visited Margaret regularly. The place where she stayed was warm and orderly, filled with people who spoke gently and moved with purpose. Margaret seemed different there, less defensive, less tired. I don't have to pretend I remember everything, she admitted during one visit. That's a relief. Lila listened, her hands folded neatly in her lap. On the walk home, Lila skipped ahead, stopping to examine a leaf caught in a fence. She seems okay, Lila said. She is, Evelyn replied. And so are you. That evening, Evelyn found Lila sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the calendar. What are you thinking about? Evelyn asked. Lila hesitated. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Evelyn sat beside her. Me too. They shared a quiet smile. Rowan lay nearby, resting more often now. His watchful energy softened, but not gone. Every so often he lifted his head, listening, then relaxed again. The night before a scheduled meeting with Dr. Brooks, one meant to review everything and make final decisions, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, replaying the past year in her mind. The missed signs, the shortcuts, the moments she had mistaken calm for safety. Lila joined her, wrapped in a blanket. I used to think if I stayed awake, nothing bad could happen, she said softly. Evelyn felt her breath catch. That was never your job. I know, Lila said, but it felt important. They sat together, the weight of unspoken thoughts between them. Later, as Evelyn tucked Lila into bed, she noticed something small but significant. Lila's notebook lay untouched on the shelf, collecting dust. Do you ever miss it? Evelyn asked. Lila thought for a moment. Sometimes, but I like not needing it. Outside, the city hummed, unaware of the quiet turning point inside the apartment. Everything felt explained now. The routines, the dog's behavior, the choices that had been made. And yet beneath that sense of understanding, something lingered, an unfinished thought, a loose thread that refused to be tied. Rowan lifted his head suddenly, ears alert, eyes focused down the hallway. Evelyn frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rowan didn't move. Lila watched him closely. "He's waiting," she said. "For what?" Evelyn asked. Lila shook her head. "I don't know, but he's always waited like that before something important." The apartment remained still. No sounds, no movement. Just the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something they didn't fully understand yet. The night stretched on, quiet and heavy, like the calm before a truth finally decided to show itself. Tomorrow, they would hear things they weren't ready for. And everything they thought they understood would be seen in a different light. The meeting room was quiet, almost too quiet. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, resting gently on the table where Evelyn sat with her hands folded tight. Lila sat beside her, feet dangling, Rowan lying calmly at her side. Dr. Brooks entered last, carrying a thin folder that seemed far heavier than it looked. "I want to start by saying this isn't about blame," he said, taking his seat. "It's about understanding." Evelyn nodded. She had told herself she was ready. Still, her heart beat faster. Dr. Brooks opened the folder. "Rowan's training records go back further than we initially thought. Much further." Lila looked down at the dog. Rowan didn't move. "He wasn't trained for Lila," Dr. Brooks continued gently. "Not originally." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. "He was trained for someone who needed support with daily routines, awareness, and safety," he said. "Someone who was beginning to struggle long before anyone wanted to admit it. Margaret." The realization didn't hit like a shock. It settled slowly, rearranging every memory Evelyn had been holding. Dr. Brooks paused, letting the truth land. When Margaret first noticed changes, she prepared. Quietly, she made plans because she was afraid of losing control and afraid of burdening you. Evelyn closed her eyes. She could see it now, her mother staying strong, staying silent, believing love meant handling things alone. And when Lila came along, he said softly, the responsibility shifted without anyone meaning for it to. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. "He knew what to do before I did." "Yes," Dr. Brooks said, "and you learned by watching. Because no one stopped you." Evelyn reached for Lila's hand, gripping it tightly. "There's more," Dr. Brooks added. "The decisions that seemed sudden or even unfair, they were made to prevent something worse, to keep everyone safe. They weren't perfect decisions, but they came from fear, not neglect." Silence filled the room. Not the uncomfortable kind, the honest kind. Evelyn felt tears slip down her cheeks, not from anger, but from understanding. "We thought we were managing," she said, "but we were just enduring." Dr. Brooks nodded. "That's very human." Lila looked up at Evelyn, eyes wide. "So, I didn't imagine it?" "No," Evelyn said, pulling her close. "You were carrying something that never belonged to you." Rowan lifted his head, resting it gently against Lila's knee, as if confirming the truth. The meeting ended quietly. No dramatic declarations, no sudden fixes. As they stepped outside, the city felt the same, but Evelyn didn't. Every moment she had judged herself for, every moment she had judged her mother. They all shifted, softened, made sense in a new way. Lila squeezed her hand. "Does this mean I can stop worrying now?" Evelyn smiled through tears. "Yes, it means we all can." Rowan walked beside them, steady and calm, his work finally seen for what it truly was. Not a mystery, not a mistake, but a bridge, built long ago by someone trying imperfectly to protect the people she loved. And now, at last, they were ready to cross it together. Time did not rush to fix anything. It moved slowly, carefully, as if afraid to undo the fragile balance that had finally been found. The apartment no longer felt like a place where everyone was bracing themselves. Mornings began with light through the windows instead of tension in the air. Even the sounds had changed. Less hurried footsteps, fewer sighs that came from deep exhaustion. Lila changed the most, not in a dramatic way, not all at once. She slept through the night without listening for movement. She forgot to check the clock. She left her bedroom door open, trusting the world outside it. The notebook stayed on the shelf, untouched, a quiet reminder of a chapter that had closed. One afternoon, Evelyn found Lila sprawled on the living room floor, building a tower from mismatched blocks. It leaned dangerously to one side. "That's going to fall," Evelyn said with a smile. Lila shrugged. "That's okay." The tower collapsed moments later. Lila laughed. Real laughter, unguarded and free. Evelyn turned away quickly, wiping her eyes. They visited Margaret often. Sometimes she was sharp and cheerful, telling stories from long ago. Other days she was quieter, needing more reminders, more patience. But she was no longer alone with it, and she no longer pretended to be stronger than she felt. "You know," Margaret said once, holding Lila's hands, "I thought love meant never needing help." Lila tilted her head. "I think love means letting people help." Margaret smiled. "I think you're right." Rowan remained a constant presence, though his role had softened. He rested more, watched less. When he did stand, it was no longer urgent, just attentive. He followed Lila when she played, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls gold, Evelyn watched her daughter brush Rowan's fur, humming quietly to herself. "Thank you," Evelyn said, surprising them both. Lila looked up. "For what?" "For trusting us," Evelyn replied, "even when we didn't deserve it yet." Lila considered this. "I think everyone was just tired." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, we were. The world outside hadn't changed. Work was still uncertain. Money still required careful planning. Margaret's journey was ongoing, not resolved, but the weight had shifted. Responsibility rested where it belonged. With the adults, with shared plans, with open conversations. Lila was no longer the quiet center holding everything together. She was just a child again. That night, as Evelyn tucked her into bed, Lila whispered, "Do you think he'll always stay with us?" Evelyn looked at Rowan, already curled up nearby, peaceful and content. "I think he'll stay as long as he's needed." Lila smiled, eyes closing easily. "I like that." The lights dimmed. The apartment settled into a gentle hush. Some wounds never disappear completely. Some stories don't end with everything fixed. But this one ended with something just as important, understanding. And sometimes that is enough to stop the bleeding and let life begin again, quietly, exactly where it is,